I want to kind of capture what today's about. There are three co-hosts for today's talk: the School of Business, the Recreation and Outdoor Education Program, and the Center for Environment and Sustainability. And all three programs are dedicated to pushing you beyond the classroom, getting you out of that setting to learn out in the world. The business program offers internship programs, even has someone on staff specifically to connect you with internships. The Recreation and Outdoor Education Program requires 100 hours of certificate work out in the community working with real recreation professionals. The Environment and Sustainability Program requires environmental service learning projects from your freshman year to when you're running them your junior year, all the way to the 600-hour master's project in the second year of the Master of Environmental Management program. So all three programs are really dedicated to learning beyond the classroom. So it means a lot that you've come out today. We're going to learn from a real practitioner of sustainability, a real leader in the outdoor industry today. And so I think you'll really enjoy that as an example of what happens when you go beyond your regular classroom. I also want to thank two really special partners to the Center for Environment and Sustainability, Margie and John Haley. This event would not be possible without them. They're mutual friends of our center and of Auden's, and they've been very good to Western, so I want to make sure I get a chance to thank them. Some of you actually are recipients of the Haley Project Fund. That's the same Haley family that made today's talk possible. Auden has a creative introduction for himself on his website. Auden has been a trailer insulator, burger flipper, ambulance medic, outward bound instructor, high school math and English teacher, and Forest Service Goose Nest Island builder. So start building your resumes in as interesting a way as he has. Some of you already have been burger flippers, I'm sure. I know I have. He has lectured at Harvard, Yale, Google, and Starbucks, as well as the second graders and the Chilean kayakers. His writing has been published in Harvard Business Review, the LA Times, Scientific American, Climate Change, Atlantic.com, Huffington Post, the Denver Post, and other media. His work has been covered in Outside, Fast Company, Travel Plus Leisure, and Business Week. In 2006, Auden was named a Global Warming Innovator by Time Magazine, and in 2007, he testified to Congress on the impacts of climate change on public lands. His book, Getting Green Done, Hard Truths from the Front Lines of the Sustainability Revolution, was called An Antidote to Greenwash, my favorite compliment, by NASA climatologist James Hansen. He's currently the VP of Sustainability for Aspen Ski Company. Let's give a warm welcome to Auden Schendler.
Let me start by saying that you guys rock. It's a beautiful day outside, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't get a ton of these days in the year, and you're in here. Thank you. I've spoken to a lot of different schools and businesses, and this is a great turnout. So thanks to John and Jeff and all of you for being here. My work has been basically 20 years in two areas. One is what actually happens when you try to do stuff to fix the world, and what really goes on, not what people say goes on. And then the other piece has been what matters versus what doesn't. And I'm going to get into all that, but first I need to talk about my son Elias and his gnome collection. When you pass a house with gnomes in the yard, you typically think there's some weirdos living there, or there's some very, very old people living there. But I'm not that old. Elias is younger. He happens to collect gnomes, and I'm one of those people, so this is what they look like. So he's obsessed with gnomes, has been for years. And when he was younger, about 6, when you have very little kids, but a family of 4, and you stay in a hotel, often one child wakes up hideously early, and you have to desperately take that child out to keep them from waking up the rest of your family, otherwise everyone's grumpy all day. So we were staying in Grand Junction, and he woke up at 6, and I took him out to the Safeway, 6 a.m. in the Safeway. I haven't had coffee yet. I'm stumbling around, looking around, and Elias, he looks over to the garden section, And he's, you know, the garden section is where you procure gnomes. And he says, Dada, will you go up to the person there and ask them if they have any gnomes? And my first thought being, you know, I'm not functional, haven't had coffee. I think, my God, I'm gonna go up to this woman and at 6 a.m. and say, hey, do you have any gnomes? And she's going to be like, this guy's a weirdo, you know, you're a freak, and all the things that you think of when you think of gnome collectors, she would think of me, and I don't want to do it. I didn't want to have to engage. But Elias kept hassling me. If you have children, you know how difficult it is to stop them from hassling you once they've started. So I go up to the woman, I say, ma'am, this may be an odd question, but I'm wondering if you have any gnomes here. And she said, no, I don't, but I collect gnomes myself. And it was such a great moment. And I tell that story not purely as it's a fun story, but it's about this broader connection that we have as human beings to certain things. And the idea that sometimes you think you're so distant from each other as people. And think of this election and the debate tonight, Hillary and Donald Trump. I mean, it has really polarized the nation. But the gnome experience leads me to think that we have more commonality than we thought, or than it may appear. And my key point is that on climate change, you're going to find that commonality, and I'm going to talk about that. Whatever your religion, your political persuasion, whatever. And the other thing I want you to know about today is that I have to revamp my talk every once in a while because I get tired of it. And this is the first iteration of this new talk. So if it's weird, and it already is, that's why. Okay, so one more little tidbit on gnomes. Elias got covered by Parade magazine, which is in basically every major U.S. newspaper. It's that insert, and it usually has stuff like, what's Donny Osmond doing now? Or topics like that. But it was on collectors of stuff. So Elias was in Parade magazine, which it must reach 12 million people. And he became basically world famous among the gnome community and started receiving gnomes everywhere. I'm on the board of Conservation Colorado in Denver. I showed up and they like, there's a package for you. We think it might be a bomb. It was a gnome. And I ended up showing that gnome to the governor. I don't know what he thought about it. Or me. But his sister, Elias's sister, Willa, is actually a badass. Like, she actually does stuff. She doesn't just lazily collect gnomes and get famous for it. And it's here she is with the head of the founder's son of Subak-do, a Korean martial art that was founded in 1945, and that's the master, the master's son. She has a black belt. She's amazing. But her brother, who doesn't do anything and is basically, and that shirt says, oh no, you didn't. He becomes world famous for collecting gnomes. Anyway, the side lesson here is that life isn't fair. But I want to go back to Elias in the context of climate change and what we care about. And this picture to me kind of speaks to really everything we care about as people. First off, look at that fishing pole. It's the Cars rod, and we've caught more fish on that than any of the advanced fly rods we have. Look at the cant of his knees, kind of double jointed, and the shoes that when you step on them they shine, and the basketball socks that you wore as a kid. This is what we care about as people. Fundamentally, we care about two things. We want to be able to take care of our children. You don't have to have kids to understand that. And in a perfect world, we'd like to be able to treat our neighbors as they would like to be treated, the golden rule. Those are the things we stand to lose in a climate change world. And I spend a little bit of the beginning of this talk talking about the soft stuff we might lose, because you always talk about the economics and the impacts of climate change. But really, that's what we stand to lose, is this. So one morning, I'm out fishing, and I'm at a friend's house, and they happen to have a lake that has this incredible stock of brook trout in it, and I have to get back. I'm drinking coffee, and I got to get my kids, and we're going that day. I'm a little frazzled, but I catch a brook trout, and I am holding it and putting it back, and I really want to get it back in the water. I hate it when the hook gets stuck, and I get it back in. I'm kind of stressed out, but as I'm putting it in, just out of the corner of my eye, I see this, and this is what the back of a brook trout looks like, and I think, my God, I couldn't believe the beauty of it, even as a kind of secondary thing in what was going on in my head. And those of you who are Cormac McCarthy fans will know that at the end of the book, The Road, there's a paragraph about trout that may be the greatest paragraph in American literature on fishing. And I didn't think of that. I thought of this other Cormac McCarthy quote, which is from earlier in the book, The Road. And he said, if he were God, he would have made the world just so and no different. And again, this is what we're talking about with climate change. We have a pretty cool world. And you're all here in this. This is a remarkable university that offers some things to study that you can't get almost anywhere in university education in the United States. And you're here because of the beauty of the world. But the quote that I was referring to is this, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he talks about the maps and mazes on the back of this brook trout, maps and mazes of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. And The Road is an apocalyptic book. McCarthy's talking about the human capacity to screw things up. And really he's talking about this. This is I'm actually tomorrow in Almont talking to a bunch of fly fishermen and fly fisherwomen. And the reality is, already western rivers are so stressed from heat that brook trout, that you can't fish. Well, brook trout will be mostly gone in the next 75 years. That's astounding. And it's because of this. You've probably seen this before in your studies, but to me, this is the most astounding graphical representation of climate change you can see. As you know, 2016 is about to beat 2015 as the hottest year in record, which was hotter than 2014, which is the previous record. But looking at this graph as students and science people, you should notice the scale on the bottom. The darker the red, the greater the temperature anomaly. That's a 13 degree Celsius temperature anomaly. It's that much warmer than the average from the last century in the northern latitudes. So that's like, what, 24 degrees Fahrenheit warmer? That's an entirely different planet. And by the way, that's exactly, even though it's cold and nasty up in those northern latitudes, that's exactly the worst place to heat up, because there are all these different feedback effects up there. One is you melt white snow and ice and expose dark ocean, and the planet more effectively absorbs temperature. You kill all the northern forests and vent that carbon into the atmosphere, and it gets warmer. And worst of all, if you melt those northern latitudes that have sequestered methane in bogs and frozen in the ocean and vent that super greenhouse gas, you create a positive feedback loop. These are the kinds of things that terrify scientists. I just very quickly want to arm you with the ability to talk about climate science with anyone in 1 minute. And here's the 1 minute deep climate science. This is a graph of atmospheric CO2 and global temperature going back 800,000 years, but now we have data back to 3 million years, and actually beyond that. And you notice through time, temperature and CO2 have always tracked. Look where CO2 is now. It's actually above 400. It's about 403. So looking at this graph and knowing nothing at all, and knowing that CO2 and temperature have tracked, doesn't it look like we have a problem? Yes. Okay, Greenland, and then you get in the room with climatologists and glaciologists, this terrifies them. Greenland is melting more than 100 years ahead of when glaciologists thought it would melt. And if you care about skiing and snow and water in the West, this is a recent study by NOAA of spring snowpack 100 years from now. And minus 50% or greater, the darker the blue, the less snow there is. That basically takes out the east and west coast skiing business. And if you're going to invest in a ski resort, I guess you invest in Jackson and Aspen. But if we don't have East Coast ski resorts, we're not going to do too well because people won't learn how to ski. So the last thing you need to know kind of on super wonky climate science is that when I started in this field, it was the hippies wearing beads and sandals, smelling of patchouli, who were warning about climate change. And now it's crazily staid, dusty, conservative groups like PricewaterhouseCoopers. If any of you get your degree in this program thinking I'm going to be an outdoors person and do environment, and you end up working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, that is a major fail, because you will be in a basement working on an Excel pivot table. My point is, these are not radical people. And the World Bank, bankers, oh yeah, those bankers are pretty radical. The International Energy Agency, another just ridiculously European bureaucratic organization, they have all said that we've probably blown the chance to stay under 2 degrees C warming over pre-industrial times. But 4C, one of these reports is titled On the Way to 4C. 4C, this guy, Kevin Anderson, who's a researcher at the Tyndall Center for Climate Change in England, he has said about 4C, here's the quote, 4 degrees Celsius warming over pre-industrial times is inconsistent with a global organized society. What does that mean? That's like wonk speak. Here's what it means for the millennial generation. This is Mad Max. But this is what a world with mass migrations, with food insecurity, with disease spread looks like. So we can't allow it to happen because it prevents us the kinds of things James Hansen predicted in the 1980s, like big floods and superstorms and more fires and more droughts and permafrost melting in Alaska. Those things don't just hamper our economy. People are, oh, what if snow goes away? What are we going to do? But that's like the least of our problems. The kinds of things we risk losing are the kinds of things that make us human. The snap on the end of the line when you catch a fish, the curative power of nature, growing up in a place that our parents understood. I like this picture of the Wright brothers in their first flight, and I think that's Orville on the right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but look at him. Look at that posture. Look at that. The feeling he has, it's something you can all relate to. It's when you hook a fish, it's when you start skiing a line, it's when you discover the answer to a math problem. It's an incredibly human experience. To think about that work that, say, the Wright brothers did, or any other work that we do as human beings, in the context of this giant global problem that's going to kind of make flight irrelevant if we don't solve it. That changes how we are as people and how we experience things. And the hopeful piece of this is that same feeling that Orville has there. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe we're doing this. You should feel about climate change today, because this is the time in the world's history that we will solve or fail to solve this problem. It's really an amazing time. And as dismal as all the slides I just showed you are, We have the technology, we have the policy know-how, we have the will, and we have the ability to solve this problem. And when we do, we end up with a more stable, secure, and healthier world. So it's an incredible time to be alive. Okay, here's the problem. When corporations try to solve this problem, they often do it in a way that doesn't solve the problem. This is just something I got online from Ball Corporation, which actually is, they make all the glass jars and cans you've ever encountered. And they say, hey, we're going to solve climate change. Okay, we know it's a problem. We know sustainability is tied to climate change. We're going to solve it. Okay, how are you going to solve it? We're going to solve it by cutting our carbon footprint 25% by whatever, 2050, 2030, whatever. Question, management team, does doing that solve the climate problem? No. So your climate plan is based on a strategy that doesn't solve climate, correct? Correct. But this is 99%, I'm not picking on Ball, 99% of corporations working on sustainability and climate have this approach. We'll reduce our carbon footprint. It is utterly disingenuous. But no one calls them out on it, because what are you going to do? Hey, what do you want them to do? They can't do more than keep their house in order. I maintain, yes, they can, and if you really care about climate in the business community, you have to do more than change your light bulbs. You know, the other piece is, if we were the ski industry and said, hey, let's follow that approach and cut the carbon footprint of every ski resort entirely to zero. The bottom is the percent of total CO2 emissions in 2010 from the ski industry. It wouldn't matter. So it's disingenuous to approach climate in that way. And the problem has been, this is Thomas Edison after 72 hours of nonstop work on the phonograph. This guy, if you haven't read about him, he was a total freak. We think of him as this genius, but really he's, and he was so distracted. He'd work on the phonograph and get it like almost there and look like totally disheveled and cranky like this. And then he'd go work on a light bulb. And then his investors would say, hey, go back to the phonograph. That'll make money. No, I'm on the light bulb. But Edison said this thing that's really powerful. Opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work. And you know why corporations and individuals and governments and in the debates tonight, no one hangs it out there on climate in a way that would change? It's because it's difficult. And you get in trouble when you stick your neck out and take political positions or aggressive activist positions, and we'd just rather, as people, not get in a fight. But the mythology of our culture is steeped with the idea that revolutions just happen. Rosa Parks, she was a tired seamstress, and she just decided to sit down on the bus. One day she just got sick of it. That's the Rosa Parks story. It's totally untrue. Rosa Parks trained for years as an activist in Miles Horton's Center for Activism called the Highlander Center in Tennessee. She was committed throughout her life to it. It was brutally difficult work. So I'm telling you, this fix on climate is going to be difficult, but it's going to be incredibly gratifying. This is James Hansen, my hero, the greatest climate scientist ever, who has never been wrong in any of his predictions. Ask me about this later. And this is what he has to do. This is no fun getting arrested, but look at the expression on his face. He's almost winking. This is a guy from Iowa who really doesn't like being in prison cells with guys named Bruno. But he's doing it because he knows we're going to have to do some hard things. These are two professional skiers, Caroline Blake, Angel Collinson, surrounded by 60 coal guys in Utah when they were speaking out against two coal plants in Utah that didn't have to meet EPA air quality regulations. They were just asking them to obey the law. But have you ever been in a room of people who hate you? It's super uncomfortable. But what we need to do is step out. So on the left, This is so rare in corporate America. These are some of the only couple CEOs you could find who have weighed in public, in major newspapers or media on climate. On the left is Todd Spoleto, the CEO of North Face, and on the right, Peter Metcalf of Black Diamond. And this is remarkable. And to get Todd to do this took a while. He's like, we're not good enough ourselves. I'm worried about being called a hypocrite. But he did it, and that's what's important. So I'm going to tell you a few stories now about how business can think entirely differently about climate and about leverage. Essentially asking the question that you ought to ask yourself, which is, where is my power and where is my leverage? First story. I was sitting at my desk one day. I got a phone call from a group called Forest Ethics. And they said, hey, would you guys ban Kleenex from your mountains? And I said, maybe. Why? And they said, well, Kimberly-Clark owns Kleenex. They're logging endangered forest. They are not talking to the environmental groups. And their Kleenex tissue has no post-consumer waste in it. And we said, okay, we'll join the boycott. And we switched out to another kind of tissue. And it didn't cost us anything to switch it out. And we only spent $30,000 on Kleenex a year. But we just swapped it out. And we joined 700 other companies in this boycott. And after we did it, I get a lot of calls from the press. And I got a call from the press saying, hey, you doing anything cool? I said, yeah, we just did something cool. We banned Kleenex. And the next day there was an article in the paper. And the next day we got totally eviscerated by the columnists and letters to the editor. The headline of one column was, save the planet, eat a boogie. Another was, the issue with tissues. People crucified us for being so hypocritical. We're a big corporation that flies people from Europe so they can ski using coal-fired power. Who are we to criticize these? Who are we to criticize those guys? And this is greenwashing. It cost you nothing to do this, and now you're a big environmental hero? So we got killed. It was awful. I had these horrible conversations with the CEO. But while this kind of career-wrecking experience was happening, we got a phone call. And it was a senior vice president speaking for the CEO of Kimberly-Clark. Now, to understand the size of Kimberly-Clark, at the time it was a $30 billion corporation, which is bigger than half the countries in the world. And they were calling this rinky-dink ski resort in Aspen because they didn't want us banning Kleenex because we had such a high profile. So we started a conversation with the CEO of Kimberly-Clark. And by the way, 700 other companies were involved in this boycott too. And a year and a half later, Kimberly-Clark announced that it radically changed how it sources fiber. And how you source fiber, how you practice forestry is a major climate issue. So this is an example of asymmetric warfare, where a very powerless entity like Aspen Skiing Company pushes on a huge, powerful, entrenched corporation and achieves some level of victory along with 700 other people or entities. But if you ask, hey, you're the sustainability guy at a ski resort, what should you be doing? This isn't what you would think you ought to be doing. Similarly, what you should be doing, people will say, you should be cutting your carbon footprint. Reduce your carbon footprint. So we did that. We changed light bulbs, we changed boilers, we built green buildings. And we looked at our data, and our carbon footprint wasn't going down, it was going up. And we said, well, we've done everything we're supposed to do. And we looked into our utility, where we got our electricity from, and it turned out that they had bought a coal plant. And the carbon intensity of their power had gone up. So we said, oh my gosh, we've been missing the forest for the trees. We've been changing light bulbs. We need to change the utility. So again, corporation, environmental director involved with the utility. So we go to the utility and we start looking at it. Well, it's a rural electric co-op with a board of directors, public board of directors. And we say, hey, can someone run for the board of directors? Sure. Okay, we're going to run someone. Okay. So we find someone, and we get 30 signatures. You need 15 to get on the ballot. And we submit the signatures, and we get a note back that most of the signatures had been just disqualified. But by the way, at this point, is this reminding you of anything? Rosa Parks and the South and voter suppression? This is power. This is power dynamics. Okay, so, well, how do you get on the ballot if we don't? Well, how come these signatures didn't work? Well, you see, if your name is on the bill, if the bill comes to your house, but it's your husband's name or your wife's name, that's who can sign the form. Oh, well, how might we find out whose name is on that bill? Well, you can come into our basement in Glenwood Springs and look, but someone has to go down there with you. Oh, so you can't actually know who's on the form. Okay, never mind. We got enough signatures that we got a candidate to run. And it turned out that they dispersed all the dividends from the co-op just before the election. That's another thing that supports incumbency. And they list the incumbents first on the ballot. Another thing that supports incumbency. And we kept running into all these problems. Oh, by the way, have you ever had a woman on the board of the utility? Yes. In 1937, there was a woman on the board. Turns out she was one of the first appointed board members. So here's what we did. We did sneaky stuff. We ran a woman for the board. We ran a modern electronic campaign against people who had never run campaigns ever. And we brought young people in, and we daylighted the fact of the utility election, called the newspaper. Again, what is a corporation doing this? Hi, newspaper. Hey, do you know that there's a utility board election coming up? Yeah. Would you cover it? No way. That is the most boring thing I can imagine. It's the most important thing happening on energy. Please cover it. And then you try to find candidates. Hey, would you run for the board of utility? That sounds like the most boring thing I could possibly do with my time. It is. But you got to do it. So we find people to run. Over 5 years of community organizing, we were able to take over the board, and the utility was already moving in a progressive direction, but we boosted them further in a more progressive direction. Holy Cross Energy is one of the most progressive utilities in the U.S. Now, rural co-ops. Did we do that? We probably didn't have that much influence on it, but this is how we needed to think about driving change. By the way, you could, initially a utility named after a cross on a mountain might not be too progressive, but it became incredibly progressive, and they're amazing. Okay, other examples of things that you wouldn't expect us to do. One was a call from the Natural Resources Defense Council, and they said, hey, would you file an amicus brief on Massachusetts versus EPA? And we said, yes. 2 questions. One is, what is an amicus brief? And 2 is, what is Mass v. EPA? Well, Mass v. EPA, as you know now, is the basis of all U.S. climate policy. And this is what Obama used to get the EPA to pass the Clean Power Plan. Incredibly important. We filed a brief. We're the only entity from the resort industry to file this brief, and helped a little bit, though probably not that much, in the courtroom discussion. But this is an example of the kind of things we ought to be doing. Another example was working with this dude, Jim Cooper, which any of you with environmental leanings, running into him in an alley would be like a kind of a nightmare. This is a guy, if you can just see that he's wearing a denim shirt, he also wears denim pants. So Wrangler shirt, Wrangler pants. We call that the Wyoming tuxedo. This he's from Alabama. He's been in coal mining forever. And his coal mine, owned by Bill Koch, whose brothers have done more to fund climate denial than anybody on the planet, owns this mine. And this mine vents methane permanently. Methane is a super potent greenhouse gas. So we get in a conversation with him and say, Jim, this is such a great thing we could do. We could capture methane leaking from this mine and burn it in turbines and make electricity. And we'd at the same time keep the methane from leaking out into the atmosphere. And I say to Jim, by the way, Jim is the kind of guy who said, in conversation with me, he said, my daddy said, sometimes you need a 2x4 to get a mule moving. This is his life philosophy. Like, these are little kernels for you. He also said, he was talking about surface miners, and he said, surface miners, they're a bunch of babies. Can you imagine having the street cred to call any kind of miner a baby? Well, Jim Cooper can. So I say, Jim, this is a great thing. It's good for the community. It's good for the economy. It's good for the environment. He holds up his hand. Oh, now, I gotta say, I don't believe this is good for the environment. I don't think methane is a pollutant. I don't think coal has caused pollution for society. I think it's been beneficial. He's got a point there. And I said, Jim, why are we talking? And he said, because I'm a resource guy, and I don't like to see resources wasted. And we said, okay, that's all we need. A little patch of common ground. We'll go forward. This is the first methane capture plant of its kind west of the Mississippi in partnership with climate deniers. It makes 3 megawatts of baseload power, which is purchased by Holy Cross. That's 24 million kilowatt hours of power, about the usage of our whole ski resort, which has 4 mountains, 18 restaurants, and 3 hotels. But we don't get the power. The power goes into the grid. A couple other things I'm going to just briefly note, because I want to leave time for questions. We've spent a lot of time working with Protect Our Winters. If you're not familiar with them, I have some information on them up here, as well as cheap stickers and then really expensive stickers. It's an intelligence test if you can find the difference between the two. Some of what we've done with Protect Our Winters is to go to Washington and meet with people who disagree with us, like Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire. We met with Kelly Ayotte over 4 years, bringing athletes from New Hampshire like Chris Davenport, from Maine, skiers, famous Olympic medalists, and met with her and said, we care about climate, we're business people, not environmentalists, you should do something about this. NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, was also doing this. And this fall, on a Thursday, we met with Kelly Ayotte, and on Monday she announced the creation of the Republican Climate Caucus in the Senate. This is unbelievable. Major progress on exactly the people we need to make progress. Again, did Powell do this? Not alone. There were many people helping us. But this is the kind of influence you need to wield. Also, you need to mobilize people to be citizens. This is a party about climate change. Yes, there was beer there too, as you can tell. But people care about this issue, in particular young people and millennials, and the people running for office know that they can get elected if they have aggressive positions on climate today. I'm going to skip over this Donald Trump story. You can ask me later. I want to give other cool examples. But one example, Ben & Jerry's collaborated with New Belgium Brewing on a beer ice cream combination, salted caramel brownie brown ale. And on the bottle, they put the Protect Our Winters logo and a website that links you to a way to call your senator. So you could be drinking a beer and hammering ice cream, it's 12 at night, you're a little buzzed, and you call your congressperson. And what's not to like? That's citizenship. We've also thought a lot about, what do we have at Aspen? I mean, we're a center of conspicuous consumption. There's a good case to be made that we should just close down. But if we couldn't close down, how would you wield power? Maybe you'd put the logo for a nonprofit on the uniform of 3,800 people, because the people skiing at your resort tend to be influential and wealthy. They include billionaires, heads of state, other people, heads of business, like the CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz. This is intended to start conversations with guests, and we trained all our 3,800 employees in how to talk about climate. I trained them in that 1-minute climate science chart that I showed you. I'm going to skip some of this, skip some of this, skip this, because I want to conclude with, how do you wake up in the morning knowing what we know about climate change? It's terrifying. You really want to kind of cower in your room, in the closet, and order Chinese food. And yet, you have to face the problem. So, one of my heroes is this guy, Charles Bukowski, who has a great line. Bukowski, by the way, if you haven't read his poetry, some of it's horrendous and some of it's amazing. And he was a bar fighter and a postman and a poet, and here he's drinking and smoking at the same time, which he tended to do. What he said was, what matters most is how well you walk through the fire. I love that line because it kind of puts you on a combat footing, because climate is a little bit, fighting climate change is a little bit like, I said, hey, it's still a beautiful afternoon out there. Thank you so much for coming. Just before we leave, I'm going to randomly select someone from the audience, bring them on stage, and I have Muhammad Ali back there. You're going to fight him. And it's Ali from 1970, not today. Well, he's not alive, but we brought him back to life. And so you're now going to fight the fastest, prettiest, smartest fighting machine the human species has ever seen. And you say, no, I have to go work on a pivot table for the accounting class I'm taking so I can go work for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I put a gun to your head and I say, no, you got to fight this guy. That's sort of climate. You have to, it doesn't matter if you don't care about it. You're going to be dealing with this in your life. And so you have to engage on this problem every day, and you have two choices. If you were going to fight Ali, what would you have two options. One is kind of cover up, let him pummel you into organ failure. We'll get you to the level 3 trauma center at Grand Junction, not too far away, great facility. The other option is pretend you know how to fight. Move around. Cover your face with your right. Try to knock him out. You might. And it will be more fun. This is how you need to approach the problem. And I submit to you, going back to Cormac McCarthy, which if you haven't read The Road after this talk, there's nothing else I can do. You want it to hurt, because nothing human beings have achieved of any importance over time has come easily. Reinhold Niebuhr, the philosopher, said, nothing of any importance will be achieved in your lifetime. Meaning it's going to be hard and it's going to take a long time. This is what humans excel at. This is what we do as people. We were built to fight impossible battles. Think of the Lord of the Rings. Think of those fights. Think of mortality. Think of theology. You're fighting impossible battles all the time. The first one is you're going to die. So we're designed for this. But a good response would be, not me. I can barely get up in the morning. I'm addicted to coffee. I sleep 14 hours a night. I'm not your guy. Or I'm not your woman. But the truth is, history is replete with examples of utterly powerless people who have done amazing things. This is Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian vegetable vendor who got so frustrated with the corruption of the police on the streets that he set himself on fire. And he triggered the Arab Spring. I'm not saying set yourself on fire, and this was a terrible thing that happened to Bouazizi, but it suggests the power of powerless people, or people with limited power. Camus, the French philosopher, was in a cafe, and some young buck reporter saw him and said, I'm going to ask this guy a killer question and see what he says. And the reporter said, if your house was on fire, what thing would you take for safekeeping? And Camus said, I would take the fire. What a badass. Just once in your life, if you had a line like that. So I'm concluding with this Raphael painting of the Genesis story of Lot's exile from the burning cities on the plain. You know the story. God gets mad at the people of the city, they're sinners, and says, I'm going to set it on fire. An angel comes down to Lot and says, hey, you're my friend, you're God's friend. Get out and don't look back. If you do, I'll punish you. So Lot leaves with his family. His wife looks back. Duh, God told you not to look back. Don't look back. Lesson 2 that I'm teaching you here tonight. And she gets turned into a pillar of salt. Kurt Vonnegut loved this story. He writes about it, and he says, so she looks back and gets turned into a pillar of salt, but that's why I love her. Because what she did was so human. And think about it. Back there in the city, that's where your kids grew up. That's where you had your first kiss. That's where you went to school. Of course you're going to look back. It's the most human thing you could do. And I submit that if you here today in this audience are presented with an opportunity to achieve some of the oldest aspirations of humankind, like taking care of your children and treating your neighbors well, by engaging in the fight against climate change, I think you can't help but do it. Thank you. Questions, John?
You okay with that?
Yeah. So now that I've used all your time, I will answer questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Auden. Does anybody have any questions? Great, Rich.
Hate to put you on the spot here, and I'll just ask you to respond as an individual not representing the Aspen Ski Company. And I'm wondering if the Vail bombing in '98 had that kind of radical action had any influence on a large company like Aspen to say, hey, maybe we better do something about climate sustainability because there's people that care about it enough to do crazy shit like bombing a ski.
Right, right. So, as you all know, that, and this is super relevant to your work, there were a $12 million restaurant, 2 Elk Lodge, got set on fire by eco-terrorists in 1998. Our division was started in '97. So we had a visionary CEO who said we should be working on this. I will tell you that I believe that the ski industry was shocked by that. And I do think some of the environmental developments after that were a result of it, which is not to condone that work, it's to say, yeah, that shocked people. The important thing, though, is I didn't feel that the actions resorts took were meaningful. I felt there was a lot of greenwashing. And my point about carbon footprint reduction was, it gets the enviros off your back, but it doesn't solve the problem. And as citizens, we've got to be careful about that. You know, it would be very easy for me to come into a room like this and give a lecture on our carbon footprint reduction and not get criticized, whereas I should be run out of the room. I should be run out of the room anyway. Other questions? Don't be shy. Just one person needs to ask a question and then everyone will ask it. And you can be, there you go.
All right, in the back.
Hi there, Andrew Fest here, photographer. I just had a question for you. You are aware that it's going to take over 100 years to replace or to fix the ozone layer above the northern hemisphere, correct? And do you think we're on a good path to do that?
So now you talk about the ozone layer, which is associated with the use of CFCs, right?
Right.
Which is not, are you asking about climate change or the ozone?
And CO2 as well, we're at 400 parts per billion now. And you mentioned that slide in the beginning, CO2 and temperature.
Yeah.
And you showed the map, the red zone, and you said
Right.
24-degree increase. I haven't seen that, but I've seen it over the last 100
Yeah,
years.
no, that's not, that's just an anomaly at a certain, in that month of January. So the question's about, hey, this is a hard problem. For us to peak, just to peak global CO2 emissions and then bring them down is a monumental task. It's going to take forever. We're probably going at least to 2 degrees C. Yeah, that's all true. But nothing says we should stop. David Hawkins at the Natural Resources Defense Council says, would you rather be in a 50-mile-per-hour car crash or a 20-mile-per-hour car crash? And so that's one way to look at it. But the other, and this is important that you guys have a level of optimism on this. One of the most pessimistic guys out there is a guy named Joe Rome, graduated first in his class in physics as a PhD from MIT, and worked for the Clinton administration in the Department of Energy. Rome has said he has never been more optimistic. He says that he believes China's CO2 emissions have peaked, China's coal use has peaked, he thinks global CO2 has peaked, and he thinks the innovation in battery power, which is a critical piece of harnessing renewable energy, is astounding. It's happening incredibly fast. So there's so much hope out there, and also as a society, we have pivoted very rapidly over time. And at certain points in history, you never know what's going to happen. an example would be, and this is kind of cliche, but in 1910 in New York, basically people were giving up. They were thinking, we're going to be buried in horse manure, because that's how you got around, and there were a lot of people. And 10 years later, of course, it wasn't a problem, which is just one hopeful story, but this is a profoundly optimistic time, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
And just a question, or I mean, maybe a challenge of sorts, I guess, in regards to not simple reductions, right, in greenhouse gas emissions or carbon footprints not being enough. Isn't that the starting place? I mean, don't you have, could it be argued that you would go through that step to get to subsequent steps, right? You're not going to be able to manipulate Holy Cross Energy to do a methane carbon capture plant had you not even considered the process of baselining your emissions and
Right.
trying to reduce them.
So this is a question saying, hey, little stuff does matter. And I'm not here saying, don't do little stuff. I'm saying, that's how you should live your life. And we should be doing this incrementally as we can, while understanding that it's not enough. And what I'm kind of calling out is the business or the individual who says, I got my Prius, I insulated my house, I got solar on the roof, what else do you want me to do? And the answer is, in that case, it's often a dodge of further action. So I'm saying, do all that stuff, it's critically important, but don't stop there and don't use it as a way to deflect your responsibility as a citizen to do more. And, last point, that more is awkward and uncomfortable, and it's going to get you in an argument in the supermarket.
What's next in terms of that more for Aspen?
We think the next 4 years is going to be an amazing time. There's a group called Citizens Climate Lobby that thinks we'll get a carbon tax in the next legislative session, possibly through a tax reform package. That would be astounding. So we're pushing hard on the political movement behind climate change action, and we're using professional athletes and World Cup and our resorts. So it's the next 4 years that are critical, so we're pretty fired up. Yeah?
So we're a university, obviously. How could all departments around campus, not just the business department and the EBS department, integrate sustainable mindedness into their courses and lectures and stuff like that?
I think increasingly, and John and I were talking about this, it's not clear to me that any discipline, whatever you're learning, is complete without understanding climate science and policy. So I think there's a way to integrate it as a core class, for example. You guys are looking at an MBA program. I've talked to other MBA programs and said, how can you not teach climate science and policy? This is going to affect every business profoundly. Well, the response is, you don't need that. We teach you how to deal with regulation and supply and demand. We give you the tools to figure it out. But as John and I were talking, what if in the 70s someone had said, you have to be educated on information technology and computers? What a leg up that would have been. So I think integrating it academically is one thing. Integrating it as voice, meaning the president of the university calling out this issue, joining different college movements on climate, and integrating it throughout by having efficiency and communication throughout is another way. Yeah.
You have an audience here of a bunch of change agents or prospective change agents, and I know a lot of them have big plans, and so I'm wondering what tips you can give for folks who want to convince the big dogs, be that the CEO, maybe it's your colleagues, or a huge entity as you did with Kimberly Clark or Seventh Generation has done with Johnson & Johnson and others. What tips, must-dos, inspiration do you have for folks?
That's a big question. Asking life tips from a non-successful life practitioner. First off, one thing that's really important is to never take the higher ground. You are never better than someone else. And someone who shows up in a gas-guzzling SUV might have a reason for it. And someone who isn't willing to spend time on climate or doesn't give to the philanthropic cause you care about may have problems you're unaware about. They may have a sick family member. You never know what's going on. So one is always recognize other people's humanity and never be righteous. Which is very hard for young people. It took me 25 years to stop being self-righteous. But that's a critical point. And the other thing is you're going to have to put some time in as a grunt where you don't have power to develop power. And so many of you, your first jobs will be changing light bulbs. My first job was shoveling gravel. And I was shoveling gravel thinking, I can do better than this. Also, I was driving a Bobcat. That was marginally better. But you have to always keep your eye on the ball, which is, hey, the light bulbs don't stop there, but know that you might have to change a lot of light bulbs and boilers and build green buildings to get to a point where you have the power and credibility to influence someone in charge. And then here's the last thing that I noticed. I was sitting around for years and years in corporate boardrooms thinking, when are we going to be in charge? When are these white-haired old guys going to leave and we can be progressive on marriage equality, on climate, on health care? And one day I was sitting around, looking around the room, and I was like, that CEO is my backcountry skiing buddy. That CFO I drink bourbon with. And I went around the room and I was like, oh my God, the inmates are in charge. So if you chip away at the Iron Glacier long enough, suddenly you're in charge. And when you are, do some stuff.
I was just wondering what advice you might have for small organizations that might not necessarily have the capital or wiggle room to ban, a product that they need to conduct business that might otherwise save them money.
Are you telling a specific story here? Give me more.
I'm trying to work with CDMR on their sustainability efforts, and I know that there's some limitations when it comes to that sort of thing, so I'm just wondering where the breakthrough ground is.
It's an interesting question. So what Crested Butte could do is use voice more than anything. It doesn't really matter how well they recycle. I do know they've done a lot of efficiency. They could use voice. So how do you work with trade groups? How do you work with other CEOs to pressure those people? I've had those conversations, and it's what I call the supermarket problem, which is you don't want to take a position that will get you into an awkward conversation in the supermarket, because even though taking that position might help save the world or save civilization, you'd much rather not get in that awkward cereal aisle encounter. So it's power building and coalition building, and I will tell you that if the CEO of even a large corporation gets 25 handwritten notes from customers, he or she is going to respond.
Yes, I just have a question about the corporations that you were talking about. You have mentioned about many corporations like going green, checking their carbon footprints, and you were saying that is not enough. And also trying to listen to what you're saying, you were like, maybe the next step is to try and influence policy. So is it, in your opinion, that the next step after going green, like corporations and people should like influence policy and government to try and mitigate the effects of climate change?
Yes, exactly right. So for example, Walmart is doing a ton on sustainability operationally. But if the CEO of Walmart were to go to the White House and say, you really have to act on climate, that would have a lot of power. So that's it. Now, many of you should note the dark side of this argument I'm making, which is, haven't corporations done just that? And isn't that why we have no climate legislation, right? Have you read Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes? Hasn't that already happened? And the answer is yes, but there should be a counterfight until we solve the problem of money in politics. There should be a counterfight.
Yes, here.
Okay, here.
Yeah, do other companies in the skiing industry contact you to do the same initiative and go green?
Are other ski resorts doing this work more and more? My gripe has been it's been operational, but more and more are willing to step up and maybe not publicly work on the movement around climate. So even Vail, which hasn't been too progressive from the outside, has actually signed on to climate letters to Obama and other people. The answer is yes, but not fast enough. The trade groups happen to be moving faster now. The national trade group is actually moving pretty fast. Over here, because you've been neglected, yeah.
All right. So if other corporations, including Aspen Ski Resorts, are all doing these small things to help climate change, and you say that those don't solve the problem, then how do we know when the problem is solved?
Question is, how do we know when we've solved the problem? Well, with climate, it's going to be pretty clear. It's going to be scientific measures of CO2. We have to, right now it's at 403 parts per million. It's got to come down to under 350 parts per million. So we'll know. The problem is that there's a lag in impact, and temperatures will keep going up. So you're not going to be alive when we've solved the problem, but your good work will put into place the fix. Yeah.
So how do you acknowledge criticism? Just being Aspen, being a big company, you see how you fly people all around the place to come ski at your place. How do you acknowledge that criticism?
I think I think we just own it and say, hey, yeah, we're energy pigs. We're basically running a pointless industry. We're flying people from all over the world. But in many ways, we're just a surrogate for America. You know, what is okay? What isn't like skiing? Do you like the computer industry that uses vast amounts of energy? Is UPS okay that drives all over the place? What is okay? We're a carbon-based society. Randy Udall used to call us petroleum man. And so we're all guilty together. So what I say is, okay, I'm not going to close down Aspen Skiing Company. But if I did care about climate, and I did have some power at Aspen Skiing Company, what would I do? And you're seeing here what we do. And the idea is that the real core of my thinking is, hey, and I've thought this, I should go to Bangladesh and work on anti-poverty stuff. I feel gross being in Aspen. And then I think, I could do that and it would be ultimately a selfish move because it would be all about me. Instead, I can stay in a place that is a center of power and influence and get heinously criticized all the time for being there, but actually drive some change and pull some levers of power. So I'm doing that. But we just eat the criticism. We're guilty.
Given that list you just rattled off of things that we're all guilty of, computers, skiing, et cetera, the list keeps going, and it's all things tied to our comforts. Is there a point at which you just start to question the growth economy itself, capitalism itself?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of someone with a beard like yourself always asks me that question. but in the end, it's not clear to me if you look at other societies and their happiness index. It's not clear to me that we're happier. Like, I'm definitely not happy because I have a lot of junk and plastic. And studies of happiness are tied to your relationships. You know, they show the more relationships you have in your life, the happier you are. And so I don't think, like, one day someone said to me, you know, ultimately we're going to have to reduce our quality of our standard of living. And I felt this pit, this like desperate feeling in the pit of my stomach. What? We're going to have to, our quality of living is going to go down to solve climate change? And then I thought, I don't care. This is kind of gross. You know, society as we live in is kind of gross. And there's some great, you know, your happiness and your quality of life can go up even if your, you know, the wealth and affluence of your society goes down. Where was that? Yeah.